guys, it's Atria. I've always wanted to do one of these story time videos. I know they're a little outdated, but I think it would be cool to talk about my game dev history and come on here for a little bit and do that. So let's start at the beginning, all the way back in my childhood, around 2010 or so. So around this time, I was going on a vacation and my parents wanted to get me something so that I could have fun on the trip, because otherwise I was a little too young for a cruise. I was going to be a little bored. So they got me a DS with a flash card on it that had like 150 games or something. And out of all those games, I only ever played Mario, which is a bit silly, but I just didn't know better. At the time, I just liked Mario. And a little later on, my family got a Wii, but I was really the only person who cared about it. I would pick up games from the library, and this is where I fell in love with 2D platformers, and the Wii was the Renaissance era for 2D platformers. So very early on, that formed my opinion that 2D platformers are the best genre in video games, and I still think this to this day. So that was how my obsession with video gaming started. So as I got older, I would start to enjoy video games as a form of artistic and creative expression. Of course, from a child's perspective, this is like drawing ideas in a notebook, coming up with your dream games, making fan games before I knew what fan games were of Mario and Kirby and stuff. I remember I had this old DeviantArt page where I made this OC called Katana, and he had a Meta Knight mask and he was an anthro furry tiger. Don't ask. So as I started to play with these ideas, I kind of got it into my head that people make games, but it'd be really cool if I could make a game someday. But I had no conception of how I'd go about doing that. I wasn't on the internet, so I didn't know how to start learning things online by myself like that. So fast forward a couple years, and now we're in 2015, which is, as I like to say, it's the start of my game dev journey, because this is the year that Mario Maker came out, and this was the year that I learned anyone can make video games. And I think that was sort of the point of Mario Maker, beyond just being another fun Nintendo game. And so initially I got into it because it was a way to express my interest in 2D platformers and sort of learn the craft myself. So I started looking into YouTubers to teach me game design, which was how I kind of discovered the concept of game design in general from a YouTuber called Mark Brown from Game Maker's Toolkit. And I still believe that he's an excellent introduction to the topic of game design. You know, he makes very entry-level, digestible videos to explain some of the most basic things in video games to anyone, and he was a great entry point for me. And he taught me how to make a good Mario Maker level, and he taught me a lot more than that while he was at it. A little into the life of Mario Maker, maybe about a year later, in 2016, I started experimenting in Game Maker Studio. And I made the switch because Mario Maker was just not fulfilling me creatively at that point. I wanted to tell a story and make my own graphics and, actually package and bundle and release a game. And so that led me to discovering Game Maker Studio. And this YouTuber called Sean Spalding, Sean's platformer series, very early on, that was my first making something competent. Not because my code was competent, but because Sean's was, and it was easy to understand and a really good resource. So I spent 2016 to 2018 making very rough little platformers that culminated in a game called Dio's Quest, which was a very, very short, one-level little platformer experience that I made that was inspired by some of my favorites, like Rayman Legends, and it stole a lot of mechanics directly from Rayman Legends, like the bonus rooms and stuff. So that comes up to about 2018, early 2018, when I decided, I want to try to make something. Around this time, I also started going to a summer camp because as a kid, my mom was always finding me, tech camps and stuff because she knew I had an interest in those kind of nerdier studies. And so I started going to this tech camp at a local college, and at this camp, initially I went to learn character design back in 2017, because I've always liked characters and stuff, and so that was an interest of mine, and that taught me some fundamental art stuff. I'm really happy that I took that class because it taught me a lot, and it put me on my artistic journey. In the upcoming years, I would take a 3D animation class, and in 2018 and 2019, I took Unreal Engine classes, which kind of taught me. It was the first time I was formally taught how to make a video game in any way. And we didn't code. It was more similar to, it was Unreal Engine's blueprint system, and I don't think we wrote any original code for that class, but the idea was that in the end of the 2-week class, you would have a little game. So of course I made platformers, because when you give me a blank screen and a player character, I'm probably going to turn it into a platformer. So that was where the journey took me, and those classes were super fun, great professor. I came home from them and I started experimenting more. So I made a couple small games, a lot of stuff that I would go on to show off in my later game dev portfolio that I used to apply to that college that I took that summer camp at. So we'll get to that later. So 2020, the world is shut down, you're tired of hearing about it, and I was stuck in my house going to school online for 3 hours a day, and I was super freaking bored. So my solution to this boredom was doubling down on game development. And this is around the time, because of that summer camp, that I was thinking, this is like a thing that I can do. Like I want this to be my life. So I sat down and I started making bigger games, and I discovered Mario Fan Games Galaxy, which is this very famous, pretty much the #1 source of Mario and Nintendo fan games on the internet. And it's this community of talented young developers making their passion, which happens to be Mario fan games for a lot of people, myself included. I didn't at the time have the confidence that I could make an entirely original game, so this was sort of my jumping off point. And Mario Fan Games Galaxy was just starting something in 2020 for the first time on their Discord, which was a fan game jam. And for those who don't know what a game jam is, if you're on Game Dev YouTube, you've probably heard of it, but essentially you get a week or a couple days or a month or a year even to make a little game to a theme. And the theme of my first jam through MFGG was Too Much Water. And at the time, I was and I still am a huge Pikmin fan. So my idea was to make a game where you play as a blue Pikmin, specifically, and collect like water-based things. And I worked with an artist on this game because I didn't have any digital art skills at the time. I was still pretty much just a doodler. So the game had a very nice visual style, had quite a bit of polish. The artist I worked with was super talented. He was the first person that I really teamed up with on a game. So it turned out, at least the graphics turned out incredible. The gameplay was baby's first attempt at making a 2D platformer, really. But it was the first game that I finished, and I was super, super duper proud of that. And also my first foray into, while I didn't make the art for the most part for the game, I did contribute to making some of the assets, like some of the less important art in the game, outside of like animated stuff. And that was my first experience with Aseprite, which is currently my favorite art program ever. I adore Aseprite. It works as an extension of my own hand. It just, that program clicks with me perfectly. So, also in 2020, I entered a Halloween game jam for MFGG, and this one was a big one. So for the first project, I worked with just me and one other person, but for this project, I was going all out. I rounded up, I collected all of the artists that I could think of, and I put them all together, and I made my little Avengers, my MFGG Avengers, and we made Kamek's Midnight Flight. So the idea, I was sort of the creative lead and the one who put all of it together, but the idea was that it would be a side-scrolling shooter similar to like I would compare them to the Mosquito stages in Rayman Origins, in terms of being like, it still plays a little bit like a platformer, but you have that vertical scrolling shooter control scheme. And the whole spooky theme with Kamek and Mario themed Halloween-y stuff. And that game ended up winning the jam, mostly because the art was incredible. And like, it really was. My team cooked on that one. Even though I didn't really understand how to put sprites in GameMaker Studio 2, and I was still manually scaling things up. Which is so funny to look back on, that I just couldn't figure out how to make the game scale itself up. So winning that competition gave me a lot of chutzpah. You know, that was the first time that I was like, people give a shit about my games. Even though there was only 8 games in that competition, it was still a special thing to me. I mean, to win the game jam on my second attempt was like, I didn't think it was possible. So that kind of solidified that this was my fan game era. This is what I was going to do for the time being. So going in, end of 2020, I started thinking of like, what other fan games can I do? And immediately I did something other than making a fan game. I joined the Ludum Dare in April 2021, and the theme was deeper and deeper. So my first thought was some kind of digging game. The idea kind of evolved of you're digging, trying to collect gems, and avoiding falling down a pit for as long as you can. And it evolved into this kind of grid-based movement game, sort of. The idea was to make it like something you play on a Nokia phone back in the day. So a little Snake-inspired, kind of my take on not one-button gameplay, but, you know, super simple gameplay. And to this day, it's I think one of the best things I've developed in terms of a game formula. And it's something I'd love to come back to at some point eventually. So then, I corrected my grave error of not making that a fan game by making a sequel that is a fan game. And as far as I'm aware, I don't think anyone else has done that before. Usually it goes in the other direction, where people make the fan game first and then they turn it into its own thing. But I made a follow-up to Mulehole called Super Mulehole. So that was essentially taking the same formula but adding a Mario twist to it. I like to do, whenever I make a Mario fan game, I kind of always just take an existing genre and I add power-ups to it, because I think that's the sauce that Mario brings. So I added power-ups and enemies and other iconography from the Mario series, and I made it into this kind of turn-based puzzle game, and I think it's definitely the better version of the game, because I had more than a week to make it, or more than 3 days I think it was. So that one turned out really good. It's still, to this day, one of the games I'm most proud of. So next, I got my wisdom teeth removed in the middle of a game jam, and that was the next MFGG game jam, and the theme was crossover. So at the time, I wasn't super into the idea. I was like, well, aren't fan games kind of mostly just crossovers already? I wasn't feeling inspired by it, and then I thought about it, and I was like, wait, but I could do something with Rhythm Heaven. So this was my excuse to make a Rhythm Heaven fan game. And I brought it, again, an all-star team, but this time I brought on artists and competent programmers, so that left me as the idea guy, which is not a role that exists in game development, but I was kind of just sitting back and telling them what to do and organizing the project, and it was sick. It turned out really well, even though for the fact that half of the jam I was laying on the couch in pain because of my tooth removal. Yeah, that turned out really fun, and I don't remember how I placed in the jam. I think it did pretty well. But it was a little like, you could sort of see my issues as a game developer forming, where I just wouldn't tutorialize anything. Like, I refused to throw in those little tutorials that Rhythm Heaven has before the minigames. And people were complaining about it in the comments, and I agree. That was like, it's a thing that I still haven't even gotten over. Like, I haven't programmed tutorials for Boss Up yet. So there was that, and then I had one more fan game left in me, and that was Ice Climber 3D. And this is kind of the straw that broke the camel's back for me in fan games. Not that anything went particularly wrong, but I was just kind of maturing and aging out of MFGG. This jam, it wasn't a disaster, but it wasn't great either. The idea was kind of half-baked. Essentially, it was the attempt to make, what if Ice Climber released as like an early SNES game using pre-rendered 3D modeling stuff. And once again, I had artists on this project that were much better artists than me, so I found a guy that did a Blender plugin that could make a pre-rendered SNES style sprite. And that turned out super cool. It's the coolest part of the game, but unfortunately, I programmed the whole game using stock assets of Butter Building from Kirby's Adventure, and I kind of built the whole gameplay loop around that. And once I imported the mountain and tried to make it 3D, it all just fell apart. That game was not well designed. Unfortunately, the art was pretty cool, but not fun to play. And that was kind of the point where I'm like, I think I'm fan-gamed out. There's a part of me that wants to get out and just start making original games. So in 2021, I'm still doing online school because COVID is still kind of a thing. And this is the point where, 2022, I was doing online school, and this is the start of my original games era. I also played Metroid at the time, so I was getting very into making sci-fi stuff. I made Robo Shootout, which is a little tiny little robot fighting game with simple flash game controls, where it'd be one player has the WASD, the other player has the arrow keys, and you're doing a super simple fight. And this was the first game that I played with other people, and it's really, to this day, it's really the only multiplayer thing I've made. And I would take this game to class towards the end of 2022 when I started going back in person, and I would play it with my classmates, and I even got the teacher in on it. And some of my classmates would whip my ass in my own game, which was really funny. So the next game I did was Alien Roundup, which was my take on a simple arcadey game. Again, the word simple is one of my favorite words. And Alien Roundup is a game where you control this like crane arm in a sci-fi environment, and it's one of those games like QWOP that's like hard to control on purpose, and that's the challenge of the game. So you would control half of the machine with some buttons and half of the machine with other buttons, and you would try to pick up these aliens as they're launching across space and then shoot them back into their ship with this extended crane arm. There wasn't too much to it, it was just kind of a little time waster project. But in the background I was building up the ethos for what would become my first and currently only paid commercial release. So now we get into Eternia Escape, which is one of my most, if not my most important game. So Eternia Escape is a platformer, of course. It's satisfying the dream that I've had since like 12 to make my own platformer. It's sort of the culmination of all the previous, at that point, 5 years of work to get to where I was. And so Eternia Escape is this game where you play as this big beefy security robot and his little monitor pal, and you go through this temporal fuckery laboratory, and you have to kill the bosses and progress. And that's all there is to it in its current release. Originally, I had a huge story and hours of content planned, but as college approached, as summer 2022 marched on, I sort of ran out of steam. And by the time I got to college, I was like not even going to release the game. Like I just had so much other stuff going on in my life that I'd kind of forgotten about releasing it. And then come December 2022, I'm thinking, I don't want to go back to the game at this point. Like I've moved on, but I also have a game sitting on my hard drive that's like 90% done. And so I decided to do a little itty bitty marketing push, you know, showing it to a couple friends and getting the word out in the way that only 2022 me would be capable of. It did really well. It sold 7 copies, which is, well, it's more than my other games sold. But I still look back on this as a major milestone of, even though it was a 45-minute long adventure, it was a full narrative, it was a full gameplay experience, you know, it had a wide variety of content for being a 45-minute game, and it's still something that I'm super proud of to look back on, and it's sort of been my North Star as a game developer to say that, like, you can release something. It's totally possible. You've done it before. So alongside that, I was doing my freshman year of college as a game design and development student, and I had fully committed to this career at that point. And at the time, I was making just like basic programming projects, you know, getting a formal education in game development and coding, which my previous 5 years of self-taught paled in comparison to. I didn't know how to use a for loop prior to taking those classes, which is insane to think about in retrospect. So I'll throw in some footage if I can find any of the stuff that I was doing at that point. But it was mostly just to chill, kind of sit back, discover myself socially, and go to class at the same time. So around that, going into that summer, I teamed up with the artist from Rats of the Plague, and we made a little game called Mythos, which was in the same vein as Chemix Midnight Flight, actually, of being a like side-scrolling space shooter, but you know, with a lot more polish and a lot of the things that I'd learned as a developer over the years. And it didn't end up going very far because I started a summer job in summer 2023, and I worked 40-hour weeks, and I didn't really have the motivation to come home and do more work on my game. But I was really proud of that small amount of content that we had actually made together, and I still think it's some of the greatest like character design and artwork in general that I have my name attached to. So that was pretty much the end of the first semester of 2023. And then I came back after summer break that year, and I took a 3D modeling class and a web design class. And the 3D modeling class was interesting. The professor had this aura of a, like, just very strange energy about him, but he was super funny, and he was a great teacher, so I learned a lot. And the final project for that class was to make a 3D environment using your own assets, your own textures, and I decided to go super ambitious with this one. And my favorite aesthetic in video games ever since I played Sonic and the Secret Rings is the rainy pirate level. That's like my favorite aesthetic. I love Rainy Ocean. So that was what I decided to model this environment over. And that turned out super freaking cool. I had a little grading scuffle about it because, yeah, semantics. But for being my first major 3D project, I think it turned out pretty well. And I even sort of gamified it to some degree. It was a little bit of like a walking simulator. Oh, and web design class. The other major class that I took that semester was my web design class, which taught me JavaScript, CSS. And for the majority of this class, I was just working on like side projects and like just, you know, basic programming stuff. But the final project was to make a game, and I decided what better to do with the medium of web, which is for the most part what we had been learning all year was text and UI stuff. So I was thinking, like, what if I made a visual novel? So I started putting the idea together of making a visual novel with a photo bash art style, which consisted of stock images, pictures that I had taken myself, and just like collages made in Photoshop and stuff. And the idea was to make it a gay Dracula dating sim. And the idea, whenever I tell people about the game, the idea makes them laugh. And it's the first time that I kind of didn't take myself so seriously in game development. I mean, I put pictures of myself doing stupid shit, like putting a pencil in my mouth or whatever, as like the narrator of the game, or just like wearing sunglasses and shit. That game was super, super fun to make. I was in a writing class at the same time too, so I was focusing a lot on the writing and the storytelling of the game. And I wrote multiple endings, including one where the guy, you know, Dracula just kills you, which is my favorite ending, even though it's the joke one. So that was about the end of my web design career. I don't really like web design. So that brings me right up to 2024. And my first major project of the year was a board game, actually, because I was taking my first game design class. The way that class worked is that people presented their game idea, and then the class would vote, and then the top four would like get made. And I ended up on a team where the game idea was No More Nixon, which was a politically themed social deduction card/board game. And the way that it worked was kind of a combination of Secret Hitler and Mahjong, which was how it was pitched to me. And so essentially you would like build up evidence and then release it so that you could like vote people out and shit. And I got super invested in that project, even though it's not my idea. It was the first time I kind of contributed to someone else's idea and helped them make their vision a reality. And I got super invested in making the art for it. That was where I got really into vector art and making stuff with like mostly just text and symbols. And I got that printed, and I have a physical copy now, which I'm super proud of. One of my favorite artifacts of game development that I've come across in my career. The other major project of 2024 is this, YouTube. As this summer was starting, I was thinking the job search was going rough. I could not find a summer job, so I was thinking, oh no, I have to do something this summer to not waste all of my time. And I decided to make a little boss fighting game. Coming off of a recent playthrough of Terraria and the Inferno mod, I was like, I want to sit down and make the most awesome, intense, crazy boss fights that I can possibly come up with. So that was where the idea for, as I called it at the time, Joustborn, as it's now known, Boss Up, came from. About a week into developing Boss Up, I decided to make a YouTube short about the game, and the short fucking exploded. Like, I was not expecting the game or the short to do that well. It got like 7,000 views in a week or something, and I was sitting there like, I got something here. For the first time, I think like people are interested in my game. I'm not just like making it for myself. And so I was like, let's make this a thing. So then I kind of committed to making the YouTube Shorts series and getting my game in people's hands and just getting it out there for the people who cared. It's brought me a lot so far. I've learned a lot about social media and like editing and making content for the internet, and it's been super fun. I didn't really ever have any interest in being a YouTuber, and to some degree I still kind of don't. I'm kind of just in this to get my games out there and to entertain people in the meanwhile. And I'm super proud of how far I've come and how much I've done in these past 10 years. Yeah, so that takes us up to today. When you're watching this, there will probably be a new devlog coming out relatively soon for Boss Up, so stay tuned. And yeah, thank you for watching and listening and clicking on all my videos. It really means a lot to me because this is my dream, and I've wanted to be a game dev pretty much as soon as I knew what a job was. So, yeah, thank you for watching, and I really hope if you're on a similar journey of your own, or you just enjoy watching development on YouTube, either way, I hope you have a wonderful day, and thanks for checking out the video. So, see ya.